Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Please introduce yourself, spelling your last name for the record.
Hi, my name is Billy, and my last name is Isaacs. Isaacs is spelled I-S-A-A-C-S.
What do you do for a living, Ms. Isaacs?
Well, for a minute, I worked at Rock World Amusement Park. It's amusement park in Midlands. But I now work at Chuggy's Bar and Grill.
And why don't you work at Rock World anymore, Ms. Isaacs?
Well, I was fired from Rock World after everything that happened on August 30th.
What happened?
On August 30th, a coworker of mine, Whit Bowman, told me that I could go home and that she was going to take over the rest of my shift. And so I went home, and then later that day, the park got robbed.
Now, before I ask you more questions about August 30th, I want to ask you a little bit about the defendant, Mr. Bowman, okay?
Sure.
How do you know Mr. Bowman?
Whit and I worked at the park together, like I said. We went through training to become ride operators at the same time, so I knew him in that respect, but after the training, we didn't really hang out that often.
Well, why not?
Well, our rides that we operated were on complete opposite ends of the park.
And which ride did you operate?
I operated the Tunnel of Terror most often.
Ms. Isaacs, please explain to us the distance between your ride and the defendant's ride.
Okay, I like to think of Rock World as like a big square on the map, and in this corner is the Tunnel of Terror, which is the ride that I worked, and then up here is the Mind Racer, which is the ride that Whit Bowman worked most often.
So the rides were pretty far apart?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Ms. Isaacs. Now, going to August 30th, did you see the defendant?
Yeah, several times that day.
Because you were working your ride that day?
Yes.
Objection, leaving.
I can rephrase the question. All right. Were you working on August 30th?
I was, ma'am. Yes, I was.
Did you work an entire day?
I worked at the Tunnel of Terror for the beginning of the day, but like I said, later in the day, a coworker, Whit Bowman, came to me and told me that I was allowed to go home because the boss said I could.
Now, has Whit Bowman ever taken over your ride before?
Yeah, when I asked her, or him, excuse me, when I asked him to. Never before has he come to me and asked me to take over my ride.
On August 30th, he came to you and asked you to take over your ride, you said?
Yes, he did. Several times, actually. 7 or 8 times he came over to my ride.
He came to your ride and asked to take it over 7 or 8 times on August 30th?
Yes, ma'am.
Objection, leaving.
The witness just said that Mr. Bowman came to her ride and asked 7 or 8 times. I just asked the question again for clarification for the jury.
All right, move on.
So Ms. Isaacs, while you were at work on August 30th, working the Tunnel of Terror, and Mr. Bowman came to your ride, and you said he told you you can leave.
Yes, ma'am. That's what he said.
Now, before this happened, you said he came 7 or 8 times to your ride, okay? And when he came over to your, when he came over to your ride, before he told you you can go home, what did he say?
I mean, I'm not sure what you're asking. He came over to my ride, like I said, before 7 or 8 times, but throughout the day he just kept asking me, kept insisting that, I could go home, and that was, like, very unusual.
Now, Ms. Isaacs, earlier you said that August 30th stuck out in your head. What stuck out about it?
Well, I mean, it was the day I got fired. There's a lot of weird stuff going on. The ride that I work is the Tunnel of Terror, and in the back of that ride, there's an employee access door, and all day I just kept seeing the door open and close.
Did you go check it out?
Yes, ma'am. On my break, I did.
What did you find?
Cameron Poole was back there.
Who's Cameron Poole?
Cameron Poole is also another employee at the park, like Whit's best friend at the park.
So when you got to this employee exit inside of your ride and you found Mr. Poole, what happened?
Cameron Poole was messing around with his pockets, and I saw him pull out a knife with the blue handle.
Well, what did Mr. Poole do with his knife?
He put it back in his pocket, and then after that, he pulled out his cell phone and began to text somebody.
Could you see who he was texting?
Yeah, in the sender field, it looked like he had typed the word Bowman.
So what did you do next?
I decided to leave Strange Enough alone, and I went back to work my ride.
And when you got back to your ride, what happened?
Not 5 minutes later, Whit came back up to my ride, and for like the 9th time that day, asked me if he could take over my ride. And he said that my boss, J.C. Longstreet, told me that I could go home with a full day's pay. Who might argue with that? So I left.
Is that all the defendant said when he came over?
As I started to leave, he asked me about blackout mode, which is something we're not supposed to use on our rides at the park.
Well, why not?
Blackout mode it's a maintenance feature, and it shuts off all the lights in the ride, but keeps the cars moving. It's dangerous to use when people are in it, so we're not supposed to use it.
So no one at the park uses blackout mode besides maintenance?
No, ma'am.
Now, Ms. Isaacs, when the defendant came over and told you you can leave, did you go straight home?
Well, you know, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade, right? So I headed out of the park. On my way there, I did see Cameron Poole, though.
You saw Cameron Poole again?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you say anything to him?
He said hey, and I was like, hey. And then he asked me if Whit was working at my ride, and I said, yeah, Whit was working at the Tunnel of Terror. Like, how did you know that? He just kind of smiled, and then said that he thought that happened all the time.
Was there anything else?
Nope, after that, I left and I went home.
Thank you, Ms. Isaacs. Thank you. No further questions at this time.
May I proceed?
You may.
Ms. Isaacs, you worked at Rock the World in the summer of 2012, correct?